Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Village Boy podcast. Tonight, we're talking about the war that President of the United States of America has picked with South Africa. It's never a dull moment with American politics. Let's get to it. Donald Trump has signed an executive order to essentially bring Afrikaans, white South Africans, and give them a political refugee status in America. These are people who left Europe, the Dutch, the French, the English, and relocated to Africa. In that process, when they did that some 400, 500 years ago, they set up shop and South Africa has essentially become their home. We're going to watch a series of videos to be able to put into context what has transpired, because for the most part, Americans are not very knowledgeable with matters that does not concern America. There's so much to unpack about this particular narrative. Let's get with it. We're going to watch this video from France 24, where we understand what the problem is, the actual law of the land, and we're going to look at the history between the whites who were being ushered a red carpet to come to America and the majority Black South Africans. Stay tuned and let's watch.
The President of the United States would have a pretty full in tray. So at first glance, bit of a surprise to hear Donald Trump lash out at South Africa on Sunday night, threatening to cut aid over its 2023 Employment Equity Act.
It's now official that he has cut funding from South Africa over this particular act. And it's a bit of a mystery how how fast it escalated. But we see the pattern. When white people are oppressed anywhere in the world, America is going to go out there and make sure that white people are okay. And they're going to roll out the red carpet to bring them to America. So let's keep watching.
Obvious suspicion over who did the whispering in Trump's ear. South African-born Elon Musk has been locking horns with the ANC-led government of Cyril Ramaphosa over its refusal to sign on to SpaceX founders' Starlink broadband via satellite system. Musk calling post-apartheid laws on Black empowerment, quote, openly racist. Who wins this showdown? More broadly,
we're going to talk about this at some point. In the weeks leading up to the election, we saw the scuffle over TikTok was about to shut down, and America was saying that American data is at risk because American data is exposed to China. TikTok has TikTok's parent company is partly Chinese, and American lawmakers made a case that if TikTok is going to stay viable, if it's going to be available to Americans, it has to have American ownership. A lot of MAGA folks rushed to Elon Musk to buy TikTok. The proposal was for an American owner to essentially buy out the Singaporean owner and take it from the Chinese government to become an American-owned property. This is what was happening with TikTok. And essentially for less than 24 hours, TikTok was taken off the airs because of this conversation. South Africa, with the years of oppression, has essentially this kind of law. Any foreign business that wants to operate in South Africa and has it in their law that a Black South African has to have a 30% stake in the business. Countries across the world do this. It's not unheard of. Elon was the one who whispered into Trump's ears, nobody determines what laws work for America. Let's understand who the Afrikaans are, where they came from. BBC did a short reporting to who America, white MAGA has decided to prioritize.
Apartheid in South Africa crumbled after Nelson Mandela walked to freedom. But Black people suffered decades of government-backed injustice before it did. Apartheid really began in 1948, but separating Black Africans from the white minority had long been a policy aim. Laws made white people officially superior, and the large Black majority faced discrimination in every aspect of their lives.
For context, White people in South Africa are the minority. They make up 8% of the population. You came and met the people in their country, and you decided that you will suppress them, you will kill them, and you will define them as inferior to you. These are the people that today we are rolling out the red carpet to say, you guys come to America because you're getting a little oppression. These are the people that white MAGA is saying white people are being oppressed in South Africa.
Living, doing business or owning land in white areas was banned. There were separate public facilities, transport and schools. Interracial marriage was banned. Many had no right to citizenship and were regarded as aliens in major cities.
Take a moment. Take a moment. Take a moment. So, again, white Europeans left Europe, came to Africa, set up shop in a country that had inhabitants. We need to reiterate this so that it gets through to everybody. And then they decided who qualifies as a citizen in their country. You come to my country, you redefine the laws of the country, you kill a vast majority of our people, because for you to be able to take over our country, you have to be able to kill us, then subject ourselves to you because we don't want to die. You determine who gets to be a citizen of South Africa.
Instead, they were made citizens of Bantustans, homelands scattered throughout South Africa. But resistance grew. In 1960, a huge peaceful protest against pass laws ended in a massacre at Sharpeville. 69 people were killed. The deaths galvanized opposition, radicalizing liberation movements like the ANC.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence.
Open conflict erupted in the 1980s, with anti-apartheid activists frequently shot at, beaten or arrested. Mass protests were firmly put down. But little by little, the apartheid establishment crumbled. Nelson Mandela, imprisoned since not long after Sharpeville, was set free in 1990. 4 years later, he was elected as South Africa's first black president. Apartheid had ended.
So you could begin to understand why South Africa is setting up or protecting the black majority. This is a majority black country that has been oppressed, abused, destroyed, and they need to be able to set guardrails that works for them. South Africa is not reinventing the wheel. South Africa is not doing what other countries are not doing. These are laws that they have looked across the world and taken to make sure that their constitution works for the majority people in South Africa. And the majority of people in South Africa happen to be blacks. South Africans are fighters. As you have seen in their history, they have fought white oppression for over 400 years. They're not going to be pushed back by Donald Trump or by Elon Musk. Elon Musk left South Africa when he was 11 years old. His understanding of South Africa is the apartheid regime. That is what Elon Musk still knows. Elon Musk still thinks that there is the white power authority, and as a white man coming back to South Africa, he wants to be able to be in a position where he can set the law and let the black folks follow. And this is why when they told him the laws of the land, he came back to America and triggered the president's office to act on his behalf. We should be enraged. We should be screaming at the top of our voices, seeing what is happening, using the president's stamp and power to attack a sovereign nation. We're going to look at what the oppression is, because we need to understand the exact problem. Because Trump is just saying they're taking land from the white farmers. White South Africans make up 8% of the population and own 70% of the land. I have no problem with Trump bringing his white South African friends to America. Please by all means, send out the military planes to get them. Let them leave South Africa so the blacks in South Africa can reclaim their land, reclaim the farms, and do with it whatever they want to do. If they don't want to develop South Africa, so what? South Africa is not America. South Africa is an independent sovereign nation. They can do whatever they so please. It's not in the best interest of America to determine what works for South Africa and what doesn't work. And so if you're going to go get the farmers, please hurry up. I hope that by the end of the year, the last of these Africans who are farm owners have relinquished all of the 70% ownership that they have on the South African land to the black people in South Africa. That would be an achievement in itself. I see no problem in that, but a lot of the Africans who I think are South Africans are willing to fight. This is their land, and they don't want to leave their lands and go to a strange country. What is happening? Is there 10 acres and a mule that Trump is ready to give? It's very possible because they're white people. We know that there's that measure to always dole out that red carpet when the race of the people are Caucasian. It's not an attack on Caucasian people. This is just stating the obvious, seeing how excited white MAGA is to rush to the rescue of white South Africans. The law being discussed here is eminent domain. Eminent domain is a law that says the government has the right to reclaim private property for public use. Compensation can be discussed in the process of reclaiming that land. So let's go ahead and watch an actual reference to the problem.
The world was also digesting his dig at South Africa, as Charlie James reports.
It all started on Sunday with this statement from Donald Trump.
Terrible things are happening in South Africa. They're taking away land, they're confiscating land, and actually they're doing things that are perhaps far worse than that.
For context, there is a South African ambassador to the US, happens to be a white man. Has the president invited the South African? That would be the first cause of action. Invite the South African ambassador to the White House and let him explain to you what is going on. This would be how diplomacy works. If you think that there's something going on in South Africa that you don't like, the first course of action is bring the South African ambassador to the US to have a conversation. What is going on? Explain to us what's happening so we best understand. And the US has so many institutions in South Africa. The US Embassy, all kinds of intelligence services are on the grounds. And this is somebody talking from a point of view that has not utilized any of those services. He has just heard Elon Musk whisper into his ears that white people are being oppressed, white people are being killed in South Africa, and their lands is being taken away. Does that sound like somebody who has sat with an ambassador has explained to him what is happening? Does that sound like somebody who has had an intelligence briefing on what is going on in South Africa? No, this was a very incoherent rambling from the president, right? The G20 summit that was supposed to hold in South Africa, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has said he will not be attending the G20 summit because white South Africans are being oppressed. Mr. Rubio, people are getting killed in the Congo. Are you going to boycott some deals that you have with the Congo? Are you, like this precedence that you're setting for white people, are you going to do it for every other person? This precedence that your department is setting, that you're boycotting and protest because of white oppression in South Africa. The white oppression is not even true. So this precedent that you're setting, is it going to be same across the board for every other person? It should have never been a race issue. It should have just been, it's a South African problem, and America is looking to see how we can assist South Africa to make sure South Africa has, and America has no business meddling with it. That's a sovereign nation. South Africa never asked for American help. But who is whispering? Elon. So we keep watching.
U.S. president offered no proof of his claim, but threatened to cut off all funding to South Africa. Trump appeared to be reacting to a law enacted last month by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, one that makes it easier for the state to seize land in the public interest. The new law aims
For the state to seize land for the public interest, eminent domain. It's not called eminent domain in South Africa. It's not uncommon for a government to reclaim private land for the good of the public. South Africa owes no explanation to anybody when they're putting out laws that would work for every South African. If that would disenfranchise white minority, then that's just the way it's going to be. That's just the way it's going to be. But what's the land distribution ownership in South Africa? Let's watch. Let's try to understand who owns what in South Africa.
aims to address the gaping land ownership disparity in South Africa, a result of decades of white minority rule under apartheid. White people make up around 8% of South Africa's population, but own 3/4 of the nation's freehold farmland.
8%, 3/4 of farmland. In what world? I'll tell you something. In America, under Jim Crow, the white majority oppressed the black minority. Listen, that makes sense. The majority was oppressing the minority. Part of them. That is standard practice everywhere. If you go to countries, you will see a large majority Muslim population oppressing maybe the Christian community. That is standard protocol. Everywhere there's oppression. It's the big one oppressing the small ones. The bullies have always been the bigger people oppressing the smaller people. Not saying it's right, but that is how it has always. In the case of South Africa, it's the minority oppressing the majority. And somehow we find justification. We accept that these people who all they're doing is land redistribution. All South Africa is trying to do is land redistribution. You cannot have 8% of the population owning 78% of farmland and think we have an equal distribution in the country. It's never going to work. You are going to create long-held resentment. Not too long ago, South Africans were killing other Africans who had immigrated to South Africa for like the way immigrants move to America. South Africa is a major economy in Africa. Other Africans moved to South Africa for work, for prosperity. And South Africa was abusing and killing these black brothers and sisters. And the rest of Africa labeled South Africa xenophobic. Instead of attacking the white people that have oppressed you for so many years, you are attacking and killing your black brothers and sisters. This was the conversation, and for the vast majority of the American population, it's not something that would make American news. Americans were never aware of this. They have never heard about this part of the conversation I'm having. There is no mass white oppression in South Africa. South Africans are essentially oppressing other black Africans, Zimbabweans, Ugandans, Kenyans, Nigerians. These are the people getting beat up, killed in South Africa, not white folks. Now, of course, with every country, there are going to be sporadic attacks. There are going to be people that, at the spur of the moment, are going to do crazy things. Like the conversation that when we have this conversation, this large conversation about police brutality, the breakdown from the white MAGA side is that this is going to be the things that happen when there's law enforcement. That is the excuse that white MAGA puts out there to defend the police when there's white police officer on black killings. And they justify this by saying there is more black on black crime than there is white officer involved shooting of a black person. This is a justification coming from white MAGA. It's the same logic in South Africa. There is more black on black crime in South Africa, either black South African on another black African. White South Africans have created communities that are white exclusive. There's a town, you can look it up on Google, on YouTube, that has an exclusive white community. There are no black people there. And this is in South Africa in 2025. There is this disturbing outrage by a government that does not seem to be able to take a moment to process how international diplomacy is going to work. It's a disgrace to see Marco Rubio rush to say he's not going to be part of the G20 summit in South Africa because he's defending white oppression. Are you kidding me?
In response to Trump, Ramaphosa said the South African government has not confiscated any land and that he looks forward to clarifying the land reform policy
with Washington. Like I said earlier, Washington should have invited the ambassador of South Africa to Washington to start this conversation. Channels should have been opened so we understand what is going on, what the law is, who is being affected. So the vast American population, who is always clueless to everything foreign outside of America, would then be able to say, okay, it's nothing that we need to get involved in. And they're not rushing to roll out red carpet to Afrikaans without knowing the Afrikaans history. It's very important to start every conversation with the context of history. Where did it start? Where are we today? And where are we headed? On this platform, we're going to put conversations in context. There's always a start point. America does not do something in abstract. There's a start point. You understand where the idea was conceived and the direction where it's headed. And so we have a government acting on the command of a South African-born richest man in the world who's not happy because he did not want to have Starlink South Africa give up 30% to a black South African. He is entitled to say, no, I don't want to do business in South Africa. That is entirely up to him. What he is not entitled to do is this breakdown that has just happened. And this is all on his shoulders. When you're not happy with the terms and conditions on the table, walk away. Do not start to manipulate, do social engineering, and have the President of the United States act on your behalf, because Trump just made, unfortunately, a fool of himself. Nothing new there, but that's what he just did. The Secretary of State just made a fool of himself. This is new for Rubio because I expect Rubio to be level-headed and to ask the right question. But I'm sure he's following the commands of Elon and Trump. And so let's watch a South African break down this law so Americans can generally understand what is going on.
Bulelwa Mabasa, director of the land reform practice at Werksman's Attorneys in Johannesburg. Thanks for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be part of the conversation.
You just heard Ray Hartley saying they passed this land reform bill, makes it easier to expropriate, but it's a bit of political theater on the part of Cyril Ramaphosa to placate his left wing in a coalition government. And in point of fact, Donald Trump is making more of it than South Africans are. Do you agree? Is that how you see it?
I think it's important to ground the discussion around what are South Africa's priorities in terms of its constitution. South Africa has been a nation that was born in 1994. We've had a racial past that has been constituted by land dispossession, racial dispossession. Our constitutional framework is grounded on specific land reform objectives. What this act does is that it formalizes what the Constitution imagined that the state would do. What this act does is the Constitution of 1996 makes provision that there will be expropriation on a basis of just and equitable compensation. Unfortunately, in South Africa, it's taken us.
There will be expropriation, which is the South African version of eminent domain. on just and equitable compensation, not based on race. However, the white South African minority owns 78% of the land. How do you own 78% of a land that was not initially yours? This is something that makes sense to a group of people in America that justify that you can come into somebody's country, take the person's land, and the person does not have a say on how to meet you halfway and say, okay, we need to be able to have a cohesive society where we live together, but I'm going to need some part of my land back so that I too can farm for my people. I too can use that land, my land, the land of my ancestors. You have only been in this country for 400 years. My people have lived in this country for thousands of years. I need a piece of this land back so that we can distribute it to Black farmers. Something has to give. Either it's taken by force or you can relinquish some of it so that there has to be a consensus, an agreement between the white farmers and the majority Black South Africans. This is not a conversation that should involve any external parties. This is an internal problem that needs to be settled by South Africans themselves. A very unnecessary fight, a very crazy and unwarranted fight with a sovereign country solving internal problems unique to them.
50 years, or rather even almost 30 years, to actually bring this legislation in line with our constitution. So we have a constitutional framework which is part and parcel of our rule of law, is part and parcel of our common law, to enable the state to acquire property for a public interest and a public purpose. This is a timely legislation.
Again, I need to reiterate, eminent domain. Americans, look it up. Eminent domain. Your government has that. South Africa is a sovereign country that also has the ability for the government to reclaim land for public consumption or public repurposing. It's the same thing, they just call it different things. Nobody owes Americans an explanation of what they're doing. Now, if South Africa was rounding up white people, putting them on the street like the way the Afrikaans during the apartheid regime did to the Blacks, and they were killing up white people in the streets, then America would be, okay, we need to go in there and intervene in the sense that we need to stop the killings. We need to be able to hold the South African government to account. We can then put financial and economic sanctions on South Africa like America did towards the apartheid regime. A lot of European governments did not do business when it came to what their brothers and sisters were doing in South Africa. They did put sanctions, and that's how that government was able to crumble, because they were not an outlet to the outside world. And so that government was able to crumble. There was international pressure. Without international pressure, the white minority will still be in power. So white people are able to do some good when there is broad consensus of discrimination and unfair practices. Without white people coming together, we are not going to see some of the good that has happened across the world. Instead of saying, let's understand the problem, once we understand the problem, we talk with leadership in South Africa, we try to have a diplomatic conversation outside of the public space, to control the dialogue, we decide to bring Afrikaans to America, as that would solve the problem. Maybe American private companies are going to rush to South Africa and fly out Afrikaans, as they did when they were bringing the second wave and third wave of European ships coming from Europe to America. It's the same thing that they're doing to the Afrikaans. It's the same thing.
That government was a bit late in putting into part of our constitutional dispensation. So there's nothing controversial about an expropriation, given that all governments throughout the world are able to use expropriation powers where it's required to do so. for a public purpose and in the public interest.
And does it mean that there's going to be the kind of expropriation that was seen in neighboring Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe of white-owned farms?
Absolutely not. In fact, this legislation is quite blind to race, to gender. What this legislation is, it's a state power that we actually borrowed from German law, from the Netherlands, where the state is able to utilize certain land for purposes of progressing our land reform objectives. South Africa is in a unique position from the other countries in Europe because we have a very unique history where in 1913, there was an act that was legislated that dispossessed Black people from their land without any compensation. This act is nothing like that. This act is a benign act that allows the government, same as America, same as the Netherlands, same as anywhere in Europe, that allows that to happen. It has no intention of targeting any racial group. It is there to ensure that there is land justice in South Africa, but not just land justice. If South Africa, for example, needs land for renewable energy, for infrastructure, for building of roads and trains and the like, it's able to do. What is actually interesting is that expropriation powers have been with us since time immemorial. In fact, the apartheid government also used expropriation powers. The controversy around this bill being targeted at white farmers is actually quite misinformed and quite misguided, because this bill says where there will be no compensation will be instances where the land is not used, there's no productivity, the landowner is absent, and so forth.
Donald Trump, please, Elon Musk, yes, bring the Africans out of South Africa. Hurry up. This is a smart idea. Get them out of Africa, bring them, put them in Iowa, take the farms from American farmers, give them their 10 acres and a mule that was promised to the Black Americans and they never had. Give them to the white South African farmers. Please make that a reality. White MAGA is essentially going to be happy and thrilled. Let this be something that is done so that the Black majority of South Africa gets to keep their land. If the white minority South Africans feel like, oh, we've had enough, we're going to go to America, Trump wants to colonize Canada, maybe he might take Canada and give it to the South Africans as their farmland, or maybe he might take Iowa and give it to South Africans, maybe he might take Idaho, because it's a farmers, so they're going to need farmland. All they have done for generations is agriculture. These are commercial, industrial farmers, this white African people. They are farmers. This land they use for farming. So they're not coming to America to go work at Jiffy Lube. They're not coming to America to go start working at Walmart. They're coming to America and they're going to need land. We have land in Iowa. We have land in Idaho. We have land in Florida. America is going to have to apply eminent domain. They're going to have to take land from Americans. And I'm sure white Americans, whose majority MAGA, are going to be happy to take a part of their land and give it to their white brothers and sisters coming from South Africa so that they can establish and set up shop, which is what has been done in America for the longest time. It's not a controversial topic. It's actually, I want it to happen so that the rest of non-white Americans can see face value how things are done. So when you get in power, you do your own stuff for your own interest and your own benefit, because this is what is done for the benefit of the white MAGA. This is what white MAGA wants, to bring in white African people who have done nothing but perpetrate mayhem for generations in South Africa. And today we're clamoring, we're begging, we're praising, we're saying, go and get them and bring them to America so that farmers in Idaho can partition their land, farmers in Florida, farmers in Minnesota, farmers across this country can partition their land and give a piece. Because if you tell these farmers today that please partition your land and give some to indigenous people, give some to Foundation of Blacks, give some to Hispanic people, we're going to say no. Within this context, the Trump administration is deporting Black and brown people and rushing to the rescue for white South Africans. That does not tell you everything you need to know. I'm not going to be able to convince you, right? The Village Boy platform is just trying to bring a balanced approach to everyday American politics. I'm not trying to take sides on the right, and I'm not trying to take sides on the left. I'm trying to understand why people do the things they do, the consequences of doing what they do, and the implications, the results that come out of it. When you go and get the white South Africans from their lands, what happens? Don't you just forfeit the land? So how can you forfeit your land because you're going to America and you're mad at South Africa and banning South Africa and depriving them of funding because they want to apply eminent domain on the lands in South Africa? Make that make some sense. But like I said, if that's what it's going to make, what I'm all about, communities being happy. If that's what's going to make white MAGA happy, let's make white MAGA happy. Get their white brothers and sisters out of South Africa. It's a predominantly black country to America, a country with a predominantly white immigrant population. Now, most Americans don't really understand the brutality of this regime. There's this video on X that I wanted to. Simon Ateba is a conservative journalist that Republicans have come and loved him because he has by far always talked about conservative issues and criticized the radical left, the liberal regime. The one time he put in context the reality of the apartheid, what they do to the black South Africans, the one time that he put in context by sharing a video, and he wrote, "This is how black South Africans were treated by white South Africans during apartheid. Claims about black people killing and displacing white people in South Africa are completely false. Anybody who understands, who has existed outside the American bubble, knows this to be true. The only people that don't know this to be true are the majority white MAGA community that does not really have a handle and understanding of anything, especially Africa. The vast majority of Americans, left or right, have zero knowledge of how Africa functions. Their understanding of Africa is a disparate continent, a continent of suffering, pain. This is what they know of Africa. This is the picture they have painted of Africa. And so anything that is told to them about Africa is supposed to be true. And so when Mr. Ateba goes to then say that, you have not been told the truth. Their land is being taken and they feel like they're losing some of their land. They cannot even benefit from this. Let's have the conversation in the comment section. If you've liked the content so far, hit the subscribe button. If you liked it, hit like, click on subscribe. We have a goal to hit 100 subscribers by the end of February. It's the 13th. We have barely 12 or 11 days to go to hit 100 subscribers. It's crawling right now, but go ahead, subscribe, like the page. Let's stay respectful. Let's have a conversation to broaden the scope. The goal here is to learn, to understand historical context, where we at and where we're going. It's been your host, Tres, for the Village Boy Podcast.